what's crazy is that we actually live in this win-lose culture. We have a win-lose story, a win-lose humanity. It is true that misery loves company. And the worst thing about Lazarus is that he became an undeniable proof that there's more to life than just this life. And so Lazarus becomes a more compelling story than Jesus, but he also becomes a story as dangerous as God. So these Jewish leaders already had concluded that Jesus was too dangerous to leave alive. He only lived 33 years. Jesus' life was really short. His public life was only around 3 years old. I mean, can you imagine creating so much nervousness, anxiety, distress, fear of how dangerous you are that they kill you within 3 years because they cannot let you live? And what did Jesus do that made him so dangerous? He talked about compassion and forgiveness. He talked about love, mercy. He talked about the kingdom of God and how God was for us and with us. He opened up the world to the poor and the outcast, the outlier. What made Jesus so dangerous that they had to kill him? And now Lazarus falls into the same category. And so they made plans to kill Lazarus as well. When you have a story that won't die, it's a story that is actually as compelling as Jesus, if not more compelling to the people around you. And it's a story that's as dangerous as God, because if your story is true, it changes everything for everyone. I was probably like a lot of people during the pandemic, or during the quarantine. I watched a lot of Netflix. I mean, I helped them raise their stock value so high, you know. It was an illusion, but I was there. And I think eventually I had to start downloading more apps because I ran out of material. And I found this documentary called Senna. Senna was a Brazilian F1 race car driver, the greatest of all time. And he didn't fit his world. One, he was a Latin in a very white world. And he became the greatest driver to ever live. And there was one interview in the documentary that just really struck me. Because one of the things that made Senna unique was that he actually had a very open faith in Jesus as a Brazilian. And so his number one competitor was like a German driver who was an atheist. And in the interview, the German driver said, Senna should not be allowed to drive because he believes in God. And so he's not afraid of death, which makes him dangerous. He should not be allowed on the track. I love that. I want to be so dangerous that people want to disqualify me. You should not be in this game. Because you don't know to be afraid. I can tell you, I can tell you the day, the time, the place. Remember being on the intersection of the street in South Dallas when I was in my 20s, around 23, 24 years old, and I was going to the highest crime rate area of the United States, highest murder rate area of the United States. And I was driving Kim's car because I was borrowing it because I was poor. And my heart was pounding because I could just see everything happening around me. It was a late Friday night and the activity was hot. And I was going to get out of my car and go into that little room over there. And I thought, I don't know if I want to get out of my car because I could be killed. And my heart was pounding. I could feel it in my chest. I stopped the car in the middle of the street. I didn't even pull over. That's how frantic I was. I just stopped in the middle of the street and put it in park, and I just started praying because I was new. I was new to faith. I was new to all of this. I said, God, how am I supposed to do any good here if I'm afraid to get out of the car? And I was kind of waiting for a verse that would comfort me because I'd memorized a few. I had several available for inspiration. Right? Greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. Fear not, for I am with you. Be strong and courageous. I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. There's so many available verses. But what came crashing into my head was a verse I had never memorized. It was accidental. What I heard was, Erwin, to live as Christ and to die as gain. I thought, that's not helpful. That's really not what I'm looking for right now. And without convincing you I'm insane, it was the clearest internal conversation I've ever had. I felt like God said to me, Erwin, if you'll just die right here, I will take you where dead men can go. Where only dead men can go. And in that moment, I had a personal funeral. This is where I let fear die. This is where I let me die so that I can be raised from the dead. Eric Roy, who's a great friend of our family, best friends with my kids and with his wife Tass, and so he came up to me this weekend and he said, hey, you're talking about Lazarus, and I've just been thinking about it. And he goes, do you think God or Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead before he rose from the dead so that he would be the first one? Great question, right? And that's a great question. And it actually boomerangs to the right answer. See, I'm convinced that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, not just to foreshadow his resurrection, but to foreshadow your resurrection. See, what Jesus wanted to make sure we understood wasn't that someone was raised from the dead before him, but that someone was going to be raised from the dead after him. That he would not be the singular human raised from the dead. Because if Jesus was the only story of resurrection, we'd go, oh, that's because he's God. But that can't happen to us. And then if anything like that might happen for us or to us, it will happen after we die and leave this life. But we have one guy right here named Lazarus who died and rose from the dead and was still lounging in his living room. So what that tells me is that you need to stop putting resurrection off and choose to die right now and let God raise you from the dead so you can live as dangerous as God.